In the quiet town of Cedarville, Vermont, life had always moved at its own gentle pace. Streets lined with maple trees blushing in autumn, neighbors waving across white picket fences, and the familiar chime of the town's clock tower every hour gave the impression that nothing ever changed. Henry Wallace, a 68-year-old retired high school history teacher, had lived in Cedarville his entire life. He knew every street, every corner shop, and every neighbor's story, just as they knew his. Henry's house was modest but full of memories. A two-story home on Maple Street with a small garden he and his late wife, Ellen, had tended together for decades. Inside, photographs lined the walls, Henry at his first day of teaching, Ellen at her graduation, their children on family vacations. It was a life carefully built, rich in small joys and steady routines. For Henry, mornings began with a slow cup of black coffee on the porch, watching the town awaken. He would wave to Mrs. Jenkins walking her golden retriever, nod to Mr. Carter tending his flower beds, and listen to the distant laughter of children heading to school. It was a life that felt secure, predictable, and comforting. But life has a way of shattering even the most stable foundations. It began subtly. A letter from the bank, neatly folded and stamped, resting in the mailbox like a harbinger of doom. Henry opened it with his usual calm, only to find numbers that made his stomach churn. The investment portfolio he had relied on for his retirement, carefully chosen, monitored for decades, had collapsed overnight due to a sudden market crash. His life savings, his safety net, evaporated into thin air. At first, he thought it must be a mistake. He reread the letter 3 times. No error. His heart sank as he realized the full scope of what had happened. The house, the garden, the small comforts of retirement, none of it was safe anymore. Henry sat on the porch for hours, staring at the horizon. The vibrant maples, once a symbol of life's steady rhythm, now seemed cruelly indifferent. He thought of Ellen, who had passed 5 years earlier, and how she had always told him, no matter what, Henry, we can face it together. Alone, facing this loss, he felt unmoored. The first week was a blur. He went through motions mechanically, eating breakfast without taste, walking the familiar streets without noticing the colors of the leaves, ignoring the friendly greetings of neighbors. For the first time in decades, Cedarville felt like a stranger's town, and his home like a cage. Yet even in despair, life nudges you forward in unexpected ways. One rainy afternoon, Henry found himself in the town library, a place he had often visited during his teaching years. Shelves of books, the faint smell of polished wood, and the quiet murmur of readers brought a strange sense of calm. It was there that he noticed a flyer pinned to the community board, volunteer tutors needed, help local students thrive. It was a small notice, almost easy to ignore. But something stirred inside him. The thought of guiding young minds, of sharing his years of experience, ignited a flicker of purpose. Perhaps, he thought, there was still a way to contribute, even if his dreams of a peaceful retirement had vanished. The first day Henry walked into the Cedarville Community Center, he felt every ounce of his uncertainty. The center smelled faintly of bleach and crayons, a stark reminder that he was stepping into a world of children again after decades away. He adjusted his worn tweed jacket, cleared his throat, and tried to appear confident. "Mr. Wallace?" a small voice called. Henry looked down to see a girl of about 12, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She held a stack of notebooks. "I'm Lily. I'm supposed to be in your reading group?" Henry nodded, smiling through the knot in his chest. "Yes, Lily. Welcome. Let's find a good spot for us to work." The children trickled in slowly, hesitant, shy, uncertain about the elderly man now in charge of their learning. As he started the session, Henry realized teaching these kids was nothing like his high school classroom years. They were restless, distracted, and often uninterested. A pang of doubt hit him. Could he really make a difference? At 68, after losing everything, was he still capable of inspiring anyone? After the first session, Henry walked home through Cedarville streets, the cold wind biting at his cheeks. He passed the corner store where he used to buy ice cream for his grandchildren and paused, staring at the display. Everything felt surreal. He had planned for decades to retire quietly, to spend his golden years gardening, reading, and visiting his children. Now, he was tutoring kids in a program he hadn't chosen, living a life he hadn't expected, and wondering if it would even matter. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of his loss pressed harder. Bills piled up. The bank threatened foreclosure. Henry stopped answering calls. Cedarville, once a place of comfort, felt like a mirror reflecting his failures. Even simple acts, like watering the garden he had so lovingly tended with Ellen, became mechanical, joyless routines. One evening, after a particularly discouraging tutoring session where the students had barely paid attention, Henry sank into his armchair with a sigh. The rain tapped against the window, mirroring the tears threatening to spill. "What's the point?" he whispered to the empty room. "I've lost everything I worked for. My house, my savings, my life." It was then that his phone rang. He hesitated but answered. It was Tommy, a former student of his from decades ago, now a local business owner. "Mr. Wallace," Tommy said, his voice warm but urgent, "I just read about what happened. I can't imagine, but I have an idea. Ever thought about running a small mentorship program for local kids interested in science and history? I'll help you get started." Henry hung up, staring at the receiver. Could he really? After everything he had lost, after feeling invisible, could he take one more step forward? That night, he didn't sleep much. He stared at Ellen's photograph on the mantelpiece, remembering her words, "No matter what, we can face it together." He whispered to her, maybe we still can." The next morning, he walked into the community center with a renewed sense of purpose, albeit tentative. He organized books, arranged chairs, and prepared a small lesson plan on American history, complete with hands-on experiments. He noticed Lily and a few others lingering at the door. They were curious, wary, but curious. Henry began by telling stories of early American inventors, explaining how curiosity and perseverance shaped the world. He paired stories with simple experiments, building miniature bridges from popsicle sticks, creating small volcanoes from baking soda and vinegar. The children's eyes lit up. Laughter and gasps filled the room. For the first time in weeks, Henry felt something he hadn't felt since his retirement began: purpose. It was a small spark, but a spark nonetheless. Word spread quickly through Cedarville. Parents who had once barely acknowledged him on the street began stopping by the center. "We heard about your classes," one mother said, eyes bright with gratitude. "My son hasn't been this excited about learning in years." The attention brought a subtle shift. Henry still faced financial pressures and personal doubts, but the knowledge that he could still make a difference began to fill the emptiness inside him. He started dedicating more hours to the program, creating weekly workshops, science fairs, and history-themed games for the children. One rainy afternoon, he found himself helping a struggling student named Max with fractions. Max's hands shook as he tried to write the numbers. "I can't do this, Mr. Wallace," he whispered. Henry knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you can," Henry said softly. "It's hard at first. Everyone struggles. But if you keep trying, step by step, you'll get there. Just like I've been learning to get back on my feet after everything." Max's eyes widened, absorbing the gravity and kindness of the words. Moments like these became Henry's lifeline. They reminded him that even when life seems to take everything, there is still the chance to give, to inspire, and to heal. The next few months marked a turning point in Henry's life. What had begun as tentative tutoring sessions slowly evolved into something much bigger. Word of his dedication, creativity, and patience spread beyond Cedarville. Parents, neighbors, and even local businesses began offering support. Mr. Carter, the owner of the hardware store, donated supplies for science experiments. Mrs. Jenkins organized weekly bake sales to fund educational materials. The community, once just a backdrop to Henry's life, became an active partner in his mission. One crisp autumn morning, as Henry prepared for another session with the students, he noticed a group of teenagers lingering near the entrance of the community center. Curious, he approached them. "Mr. Wallace?" one asked hesitantly. "We heard you're running science and history projects. Can we join?" Henry's eyes twinkled. "Of course," he said. The more, the merrier. Step inside, let's make some history and science magic happen. The teenagers, initially skeptical, became eager participants. Together, they built working models of simple machines, recreated historic experiments, and even staged mini historical reenactments. Henry guided them with patience, drawing on decades of teaching experience. With each passing day, he saw the spark of curiosity reignite, not just in the students but in himself. The mentorship program grew. Cedarville High School invited Henry to run after-school clubs. Local newspapers featured his story, 68-year-old teacher turns loss into community inspiration. Henry read the articles quietly, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. Who would have thought that losing everything could lead to something so profound? At home, Henry's life began to shift as well. He downsized his house slightly, selling a portion of his property to ease financial strain. The move, though practical, felt symbolic. He was letting go of the past to embrace the future. Each morning, he tended to his small garden, now smaller but vibrant, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. Henry also began reconnecting with his children and grandchildren. Initially, they had been hesitant, unsure how to navigate his financial struggles and emotional state. But seeing the transformation in their father and grandfather, the spark of life returning to his eyes, the joy in his laughter, brought them closer. Weekends were filled with laughter, storytelling, and shared meals, often featuring the students who had become like extended family. One particularly memorable afternoon, Henry took his students on a field trip to the nearby Maplewood forest. The autumn leaves were ablaze in reds, oranges, and golds, and the crisp air was filled with the scent of pine and earth. Henry shared stories of explorers, scientists, and inventors, weaving history and science into the natural beauty around them. During a break, Max, the student Henry had helped months earlier with fractions, approached him. "Mr. Wallace," he said, eyes wide, "thank you. I used to think learning was boring, but now I actually want to do more. You made me believe I can do it." Henry felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't the money, the house, or the status he had lost that mattered, it was moments like this. The ability to touch lives, to inspire, to leave a legacy far richer than any financial fortune. As winter approached, Henry's programs became a cornerstone of Cedarville life. Parents relied on him not just for education but for guidance. Teachers sought his advice, appreciating the wisdom he brought from decades of experience. Even the town council took notice, offering support and public recognition for his dedication. Henry often reflected on his journey late at night, sitting by the fireplace with a warm cup of tea. He thought about the early days of despair, the sense of loss that had felt insurmountable. He remembered staring at Ellen's photograph, feeling lost, and wondered if she would have been proud. Now, he smiled, knowing she would have been, proud not of wealth or material success, but of resilience, compassion, and the difference he made in people's lives. One snowy evening, Cedarville held its annual winter festival. The streets were decorated with twinkling lights, families gathered around bonfires, and children's laughter echoed through the town square. Henry was invited to give a short speech. As he stepped onto the stage, looking out at familiar faces filled with warmth and support, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Life," he began, voice steady but emotional, "doesn't always go as we plan. I lost my home, my savings, and what I thought would be my peaceful retirement. But in that loss, I found something far more valuable: purpose, community, and the joy of helping others. If my story shows anything, it's that even when life seems to take everything, it can give us a chance to build something greater than we ever imagined." The crowd erupted in applause. Parents, students, and neighbors clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Henry's heart swelled. For the first time in months, he truly felt whole again. Spring came to Cedarville with gentle rains and vibrant blooms. Henry's mentorship programs expanded, including workshops in neighboring towns. He even collaborated with retired colleagues to create a small nonprofit focused on community-based education, offering resources to towns without access to robust programs. At home, Henry kept a small journal, documenting every success, every struggle, and every lesson learned. He reflected on how losing everything had forced him to look inward, reassess his priorities, and embrace a life of giving. His days were now filled with activity, laughter, and connection, richer than any retirement plan could have offered. Henry's transformation was complete. He had turned despair into opportunity, isolation into community, and loss into legacy. Cedarville, once the backdrop of his quiet life, had become the canvas for a story of resilience and hope. Henry's journey reminds us all that life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to discover what truly matters: purpose, connection, and the joy of helping others. If Henry's story inspired you, if it reminded you that no matter how dark life gets, there is always a way to rise again, then don't leave without hitting that subscribe button. Join us, and let's celebrate stories of courage, resilience, and transformation together. Because just like Henry, we can all find new beginnings, even when life seems to have taken everything away. Remember, setbacks aren't the end, they can be the start of your most meaningful chapter. Subscribe now, and let these stories guide and uplift you on your journey.